In early November 1950, Soviet MiG-15s emerged as a formidable challenge to the United Nations Air Forces. These jets, strategically positioned just across the Yalu River within Chinese territory, could swiftly enter North Korean airspace. The United States Air Force was bending every effort to get more modern jet fighters to Korea. On November 8, a decisive order was issued to deploy an F-86A Sabre wing to Korea. The U.S. Air Force subsequently instructed the 4th Fighter-Interceptor Wing to begin preparations for an immediate overseas deployment. The 4th Wing, the second Sabre-equipped outfit, only became fully operational with Sabres in all 3 squadrons in late September 1949, barely a year before the unit went to Korea. The wing did have combat-experienced, high-time pilots in leadership positions, starting with Wing Commander Colonel George F. Smith and Air Group Commander Colonel John C. Meyer, whose score of 24 victories while flying in World War II made him the second-ranked Mustang ace of the war. Lieutenant Colonel Glenn T. Eagleston, who had scored 18.5 victories, commanded the 334th Fighter-Interceptor Squadron. The 335th Fighter-Interceptor Squadron was led by Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Emmert, Jr., a 6-victory ace in World War II. Lieutenant Colonel Bruce Hinton, who commanded the 336th Fighter-Interceptor Squadron, was the only leader in the group who did not have frontline combat experience from World War II, though he was a highly experienced pilot. On November 9, 1950, a TWX was dispatched from the Pentagon to the headquarters of the 4th Fighter-Interceptor Wing at Newcastle, Delaware. The message carried decisive orders: the 4th Fighter-Interceptor Wing was to deploy to Korea. Operation Strawboss was put into effect on November 10, and the pilots began ferrying the aircraft west to the points of embarkation on the 11th. The 334th and 335th Squadrons took 49 Sabres to San Diego Naval Air Station, where they were loaded aboard the Navy escort carrier USS Cape Esperance. The 336th Squadron ferried 26 F-86s to McClellan AFB, then to the Naval Air Station at Oakland, where they were loaded onto at least 4 fast fleet tankers. In preparation for deployment, Strawboss orders mandated that all other F-86 groups relinquish their newest F-86A Sabres to the 4th Fighter-Interceptor Group. As the second unit to transition to F-86As, the 4th FIG initially possessed only a limited number of the newly manufactured 49 FY Sabres. To bolster its strength, the 1st FIG transferred 8 Sabres, the 33rd FIG provided 21, the 56th Group contributed 18, the 81st FIG handed over 5, and the Fighter School at Nellis added another 8. This collective effort ensured the 4th FIG was fully equipped with the most advanced fighters for the mission ahead. There wasn't time for proper maintenance prior to the coming 2-week ocean voyage to the Far East. Paper and masking tape was used to cover openings and control surfaces that might be damaged by salt spray. But these quickly tore off during the voyage. And many of the planes aboard the aircraft carrier had wings or tail surfaces that extended beyond the edge of the deck, making resealing virtually impossible. On top of that, Navy personnel damaged quite a few aircraft during loading and unloading, including one aircraft that was dropped.
On the 9th of November, we received orders to prepare to move to Japan. We had to be out of Dover by 11 o'clock hours on the 11th. The 334th and 335th would go to San Diego to be loaded onto a Navy aircraft carrier. My squadron, the 336th, was to fly to McClellan AFB near Sacramento, to be loaded onto a tanker. We had to be at our destinations within 48 hours, or else.
The tankers, carrying the 336th Squadron, departed San Francisco the week of November 15. The Sabres were lashed to the top deck and covered with a light film of oil. The USS Cape Esperance, with 49 Sabres and several F-84Es tied down to the flight deck, left San Diego on November 23. The ground crews and tech reps went with the airplanes. But the pilots went to Travis Air Force Base, and were flown to Japan aboard Air Force C-54s. In the event, the 336th's airplanes arrived in Yokohama, Japan, aboard the tankers on December 5, while Cape Esperance did not arrive until December 10. North American tech rep John Henderson recalls the condition of the airplanes.
As soon as the airplanes were on dry land, they were taken to the wash rack for degreasing and cleaning. We supply, along with men from the 6,408th Troops Maintenance Squadron Apelkisa. The 6,408 guys supervised the large complement of Japanese movers and cleaners that worked at Kisa.
The severity of the saltwater corrosion depended upon how far forward each airplane had been on the carrier's deck. Most of the damage was due to electrolytic action between the magnesium filler strips attached to the aileron's aluminum trailing edge. The damage that occurred en route slowed the inspection of the Sabres and decreased their availability for ferrying to Johnson Air Base, north of Tokyo. Since the airplanes bore a striking resemblance to the MiGs, it was decided to apply some quick ID stripes such as those applied to Allied aircraft prior to the D-Day landings in World War II. They even chose the same colors. All the 4th FIG Sabres had 3 black and 2 white bands painted around the wingtips and the fuselage behind the canopy. In addition, a black stripe was painted on the rudder. Squadrons would be identified by a single color band just behind the nose intake, red for the 334th FIS, yellow for the 335th, and blue for the 336th. As soon as the airplanes were painted, Lieutenant Colonel Bruce Hinton led them directly to Korea. Staging through Taegu for the last leg of the flight, the first 7 F-86s arrived at Kimpo Air Base on December 13, 1950. What they found wasn't exactly conducive to high-performance jet aircraft operations.
The blowing dust of summer was now frozen mud from the bitter cold that blew out of Manchuria. The temperature was sub-zero the entire length of the peninsula. The base was crowded, had very little hard stand area for parking, and a single 5,000-foot runway with no overrun. The changes between stateside duty in Korea took a lot of getting used to, not just the austere working conditions, but the change in working demands from peacetime to war conditions taxed all the personnel. The Sabres were maintained on the open ramps. There were no hangars, not even revetments to break the wind. We had a specific area in which to park and maintain the airplanes. We had enough intake and exhaust plugs to keep foreign objects out of the intakes while parked. But foreign object damage, FOD, was a constant threat as the Sabres taxied for takeoff. The best the crews could do was to police up their own areas all the time. We also had a walking party police the taxiways prior to takeoff or landing.
In spite of the horrible conditions at Kimpo, Detachment A of the 4th FIG was in place the night of December 13, 1950. The next morning, the aircraft were completely checked over and made combat ready. The first mission was slated for the following morning, December 15. The first mission served as an orientation flight, familiarizing the pilots with the terrain and the route to and from MiG Alley, the contested airspace near the Yalu River in northwest Korea. Located approximately 230 miles from Kimpo Air Base, the Yalu River marked the edge of their operational range. The first combat mission to MiG Alley was set for December 16, but an unexpected snowstorm blanketed Kimpo, halting all flight operations. Army crews worked tirelessly to clear the runways, but by the time they succeeded, the day had already slipped away. The long-anticipated first mission would have to wait until the following morning. The morning mission was led by Colonel John C. Meyer, Group Commander of the 4th FIG. The mission took off at about 900 hours and proceeded north, where they rendezvoused with a flight of B-29s. The B-29 target was Ganggi, North Korea. All went well, the B-29s hit the target, and no MiGs were sighted. The Sabres returned to Kimpo more than a little upset at the lack of action. The afternoon mission was a different story. At 1405 hours, Lieutenant Colonel Bruce Hinton, piloting the F-86A Sabre, led a flight of 4 Sabres as they lifted off the runway at Kimpo Air Base. Accompanying him were Captain M.O. Pitts, Captain Ray Janicek, and Lieutenant Paul Bryce. The formation flew north, heading toward a patrol zone near Sinuiju, just across the Yalu River from the Chinese air base at Antung. In order to deceive the enemy and hopefully entice the MiGs to come up and fight, Hinton used radio call signs for F-80s, while the Sabres flew patterns at lower altitudes associated with the shooting stars. The Sabres arrived south of the Yalu at 25,000 feet at a speed of Mach 0.68.
The number 2 pilot in our flight spotted 4 bogies approaching from Sinuiju, and Captain Pitts, my element lead, identified them as swept-wing types.
The MiGs were at approximately 18,000 feet, climbing southeasterly. When Hinton radioed the others to release their drop tanks, he discovered his radio wasn't working. The flight did jettison their tanks, however, they dived on the enemy and closed the MiG formation at 410 knots at 20,000 feet as they pushed their throttles to maximum power. Hinton became separated from his flight when he banked too close behind the MiGs.
I picked out the lead element to attack, and when I closed to about 4,000 feet their external tanks came off. I checked my speed as I moved to 6 o'clock on the element and saw I was at 0.96 Mach, past the 0.95 red line for the Sabre and faster than I had ever flown an F-86. I closed on the enemy wingman and put my pipper squarely on where the fuel tank should be.
At a range of 1,200 feet, Hinton fired a long burst and hit the second MiG-15 in its right wing and fuselage. The MiG began smoking and Hinton realized he had outrun his wingman. The MiG slowed and Hinton opened his dive brakes and throttled back. He fired a second long burst and saw fire come out of the MiG's tailpipe as smoke came out of the rest of the enemy plane.
Before I could fire again, my Sabre began bucking and twisting in his jet wash. I slid off to the inside and closed to about 800 feet.
He fired a third long burst and fire erupted over the entire rear of the MiG's fuselage.
Pieces came off and his tailpipe was filled with smoke. Seconds later a long plume of flame came out.
Hinton was closing fast. He popped his speed brakes and throttled back a second time. A fourth long burst knocked more pieces off. The MiG crashed 10 miles southeast of the Yalu River. The F-86 Sabre had scored its first aerial victory. The MiG-15 that was shot down had been piloted by Lieutenant Colonel I.A.N. Efremenko, the Chief of Aerial Gunnery Service for the 50th IAD. Recognizing the futility of the situation, Lieutenant Colonel Efremenko ejected from his stricken aircraft moments before its crash, marking the first recorded combat ejection of a Soviet pilot from a MiG-15. Parachuting safely to the ground, Efremenko was able to make his way back to base shortly after the incident. Back at Kimpo, Hinton performed a victory roll to celebrate the Sabres' first score, to the cheers of those on the field. Within a week, 32 Sabres were at Kimpo, manned by pilots of all 3 squadrons. In the battles that followed, the American F-86 and Soviet MiG-15 would engage in a series of epic and intense aerial confrontations. Stay tuned for our upcoming video series on MiG Alley. If you enjoyed the content, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment to help support us in creating more high-quality videos.